When the past returns to your life, you usually start thinking about what might have gone wrong recently. At least, that's how I used to think, trying to find the reason in the present. Playing everything back further and further until I found that one point where everything started going downhill. Right now, this is especially important, considering what kind of past has begun to catch up with me. Each of you can say with warmth and nostalgia, bring back my 2007, remembering something deeply personal, untouched by the passage of time. I think there's no need to dwell on that those who remember will understand, and for the rest, it won't matter much. But for me, that year was the very point I had to rewind everything back to because of who resurfaced in my life a couple of years ago. Personally, I hate that cursed year and would never want to relive it. And now, I'll try to explain why. 2007 was the year my family moved to another city, my 9th grade. I wasn't a social person back then, and I'm still not. So my parents' magic phrase, "You'll make new friends," didn't work, no matter how many times they repeated it after the move. Things weren't exactly smooth in my family either. My parents seemed to be at the equator of their relationship, and looking back now, I realize that it was a test of circumstances and time. But even if I had understood something about adult life back then, it wouldn't have helped me. Back then, and probably even now, these things weren't talked about, especially with kids. I didn't fit in with the class I was placed in. A clique of spoiled rich kids who looked down on everyone, druggies, and the hope of the school all rolled into one. For the first few weeks, I even tried talking to them, but I quickly faded into the background, lost in my own world at the fringes of the class. The only things keeping me afloat in this world were the sacred trinity black metal, Time Zero, and the music school where I was learning to play guitar. These three pillars, these three mental supports, helped me survive in a way. Of course, I wasn't one of those warriors who, fighting against reality, drown themselves in alcohol or start hacking people up while the remains of their sanity crumble like ashes. But I had my own way of dealing with the crushing hopelessness. My Gorgoroth t-shirted was my shield against this world. Thanks to it, I could keep pushing through the meaningless, gray, identical days. That shirt saved me, and yet, in the end, it was also what destroyed me, no matter how cliché that sounds. I remember late September, coming home from music school. As always, that day, a monotonous, cold rain was falling. Since childhood, I had a habit of cutting through courtyards, and in the new city, I quickly found my own shortcut home. Through empty lots, a football field, garages, and a piece of abandoned land where huge concrete slabs from a dead construction site were stacked. There, sitting on those slabs, not even bothering to hide from the rain, was a large group of people. Gorgoroth? No fine way. Hey kid, come over here. Asterisk. A guy with long hair in a worn-out black leather jacket stepped out from the group. Underneath, I could see a t-shirt with a burning church. They were drinking port wine, listening to music, and letting the cold rain hit their faces. In 2007, everything was all emo and goth, and at first I thought this crew was goth adjacent. But then the guy who called out to me introduced himself. "I'm Lekka," he said. We're like hardcore Satanists, you get it, he joked, and we shook hands. Then he introduced me to the rest of the group, which was far from small. They called him Lestat in the group because of his resemblance to the main character from Queen of the Damned. There was also Nora, one-armed Tolian, Uncle Igor, who was already old enough to be called Uncle by everyone, Kamarina, Katya, who realized halfway through life that her name was actually Marina, but everyone still called her Kamarina as a joke. Then there was gray-haired Sergei. He was only 18, but already completely gray. Hungry, aka Kirill, a guy who never a Tino one in the group had ever seen him eat. There was also Mother Valya. Why she was called Mother would become clear under horrifying circumstances. Archpriest Mikhail, who, as far as I remember, was always lying drunk whenever I showed up. Then there was Shurawheel, because he was the driver and would take us places when needed. Oil, Shaman, Anya, Pension, Vitya, Mirage, Stas, Vovin, Mitya. There were even more of them when the group went out of town into the wilderness. I can't even remember all their names. But back then, it was Lestat who introduced me to everyone, kind of took me under his wing. Apparently, they were Satanists. At least, I don't remember Lestat ever explicitly stating it. He mostly joked about it. Whether it was all just posing or not was hard for me to tell at the time. But besides that, they also really believed that our world was not what it seemed. They believed in the supernatural and the occult. They regularly ventured into abandoned places, cursed sites, cemeteries. Before I met them, I used to go straight home after music school and grind time zero until the early morning. But now, I started hanging out with them every day. We drank port wine, wandered along railroad tracks beyond the city. As night fell, we'd head to abandoned factories, up to the technical floors. Sometimes they'd spray paint something on the walls. Sometimes we'd light fires and warm ourselves by them. There was no real purpose, it was just one huge group, and maybe that was the purpose. The more, the better. A month passed. I got to know almost everyone personally. Even the towering, terrifying Eyeing Disaster turned out to be a good-natured guy who loved 8-bit consoles and could talk about Dendy for hours. I managed to get along with almost every except for Uncle Igor. No matter how hard I tried to talk to him, no matter how drunk he was, he always said the same thing. Everyone in the group called me Kid because I was the youngest. For some reason, my presence annoyed him. He never hid his aggression toward meth, called me an idiot whenever possible, and always told me to get lost. At first, I didn't understand why. Once, he even threw an empty beer bottle at me. That was the day Lestat said I was ready for initiation. That night, Uncle Igor was shouting again, cursing me as usual. His words drowned in the noise of the huge group. Turns out, he was the only one still trying to help me, to warn me, to give me a chance. That night, I couldn't understand it, and then, as it always happens, it was too late. You have to go through a couple of trials to prove that you're worthy, Lestat said as he led me to the first of the 2 trials. The first thing. Really, every one of us has done it, even Kamarina. It was evening, and we were heading toward one of the residential districts. You've heard the story of the Gorky sadist, right? our city's very own maniac. He used to kill kids in his apartment in broad daylight. Tortured them in such horrific ways that the case files are still classified. You know what his trick was? He rented an apartment in a building for the deaf. Yeah, can you believe it? We actually have one of those in our city. It used to be a dormitory for the hearing impaired, part of some vocational school or something. Then in the 90s, like magic, the rooms turned into apartments. Straight up witchcraft. After that, only deaf people kept buying apartments. Their word must have spread somehow, maybe just by word of mouth. Lestat chuckled before continuing. And this old bastard caught on realized that only the deaf lived there. And for him, that was the perfect setup. So he started bringing kids over. I mean, why not? No one would hear the screams anyway. Of course, he wasn't quite Chikatilo, but by our city's standards, he basically committed a genocide. 8 kids in just 3 years. He probably could have kept going too, but he started drinking himself into oblivion. One day, he got so wasted he forgot to lock his door, passed out, pissed himself, and just left everything open. Some neighbor peeked inside, and it was like a scene straight out of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So they bagged him. His apartment stood sealed up for a while, but then the whole city was outraged. People tried burning it down a couple of times, smashed the windows, vandalized the place, and well, we didn't just sit around either, we started going there. Viktor Andreevich took me personally. Locked me in there overnight. That's your first trial. We reached a regular 5-story apartment building that didn't stand out among the others. We went inside just an ordinary entrance, an ordinary staircase, and a corridor. The only unusual thing was that there was a corridor, something you don't usually see in apartment buildings. Along the hallway, there were doors like in a dormitory. We climbed to the 5th floor, walked to the very end of the hallway. At the dead end, there was a dirty door covered in graffiti and curses. Lestat started jingling a set of keys and unlocked a large padlock. Inside, it reeked of piss and construction dust. The room was empty, except for broken parquet boards scattered everywhere. No furniture, no signs that anyone had ever lived there. Lestat's flashlight swept the space. The walls were covered in graffiti and obscene messages, as if everyone who had ever set foot in this place had left a mark. Visually, nothing in the room was particularly terrifying, but the feeling of being in there was deeply unsettling, oppressive even. My mind started filling with strange, heavy thoughts. Not fear, something more suffocating. A vague sense of regret, bitterness, the kind of existential dread that makes you feel utterly powerless. Watch what happens now, Lestat began. It's real simple. Give me your phone, and I lock you in here until morning. With the first light of dawn, I'll be back. Sharp. He stretched out his hand, waiting for my phone. And what exactly am I supposed to do? I asked, still not fully grasping what was happening. You wait, and you listen carefully. This place is home to the spirits of those who were never heard. Just don't freak out, okay? You know why Sergei's hair turned gray? He got too scared. Lestat clapped me on the shoulder, laughing, asterisk, asterisk. Whatever you see here tonight, whatever you heardn't, believe it. They'll try to scare you, but not out of malice, more out of boredom. They don't feel anything anymore. Remember, they're dead. You're not here just to make it till morning. You're here to prove to our group that you're worthy, Viktor Andreevich was a genius, found the pattern. He knew how to make the transition. Soon, you'll understand everything. Be patient. Staying here overnight is crucial for the transition. Be very attentive. But I'll say it again. No matter what you see here, remember, they can't hurt you. They've been dead for a long time. Asterisk, asterisk. Jesus, dude, this is some Vi shit. You're just gonna lock me in here and leave? Should I draw a protective circle on the floor too? Lestat laughed. All right, hand over your phone and I'll be on my way. Don't sweat it, I was here too. And yeah, it scared the shit out of me, especially when Viktor Andreevich told me all about it. He was a great man. All right, give me the phone. I placed my phone in his hand and remained standing. At least leave me a couple of cigarettes. Not allowed. The light might scare off the dead and attract things you don't want to attract. All right, see you in the morning, hopefully. He laughed and locked the door from the outside. His last words sent a shiver down my spine. Even before his footsteps faded down the corridor, I was already regretting being here. Suddenly, the whole thing felt incredibly stupid. I liked their group, spending time with them, talking about music, drinking. I had no other friend. School was a nightmare. My parents were constantly fighting, and before I left, they didn't even ask which friend I was staying over with. Lestat's group was something more to me than just friends. Maybe it sounds naive now, but back then, I didn't want to lose them. I didn't want to betray their trust or be seen as a coward. That's why I agreed to all this. I didn't have a watch, so keeping track of time was impossible. Every now and then, strange noises echoed through the building, a deep hum, like a washing machine shifting into a spin cycle. Distant doors slamming somewhere in the depths of the building. Then, silence. The room had nowhere to sit, so I just stood in place. To my right, the boarded-up window occasionally whistled as cold air seeped through the cracks. The boards and broken furniture blocked out nearly all light. The darkness was so thick that, even waving my hand in front of my face, I couldn't see it. If I stepped even a foot to the side, I'd lose all sense of where I was. But as long as I stayed still, I could hold a mental map of the room. The entrance door to my left, the window to my right. Behind me, the wall and a piece of broken paneling ripped from a built-in closet. And beyond that, just the dead. There were too many chaotic thoughts in my head. What was this transition? Who was Viktor Andreevich, and why did Lestat speak of him with such respect? Standing in one place, I kept my hands in the pockets of my hoodie, shifting from foot to foot. The room was getting colder. I had no idea how much time had passed, but eventually, my hands and neck started to go numb. Rolling my shoulders and stretching my neck, I tried to shake it off. My hands inside the hoodie pockets felt ice cold. I pulled them out and tried to roll up my sleeves to tuck my hands inside them. The right sleeve went up just fine, but the left one got stuck. As I tried to adjust it along the seam, shaking my arm and pulling it down, it happened in a split second. A fleeting moment. Everything happened too fast for me to scream or recoil. A small, cold hand wrapped around mine and held it tight. Fear paralyzed me. Despite its tiny size, that grip was unnaturally strong. Something was holding me, squeezing my hand with crushing force. That small hand was pulling me down, leading me somewhere. 1,000 times I had seen Horace imagine myself in the protagonist's place. But when something truly impossible happened to me, I didn't even want to scream. Deep down, I clung to the belief that this was all just a prank by Lestat and the others. That there was some hidden passage, and they had snuck in unnoticed. But that cold, that burning, real cold, was stronger than any logical explanation. Whoever or whatever's there started leading me around the room, walking me in circles, never letting go of my hand. The circles grew wider and wider. With each turn, we moved closer to the walls. Trying to break free from those icy, gripping fingers was useless, not even worth attempting. On one of the rounds, I instinctively tried to pull my hand back and heard a snarl at floor level. I wanted to believe it was a joke, but with each circle, my arm, which had been hanging straight down at first, was now being pulled higher and higher horizontally, as if the thing holding me was moving freely along the wall. My head spun. Nausea churned in my stomach. Was this the 1,000th lap? The 10,000th? The urge to vomit became unbearable. My arm was almost above my head now, and whatever was holding it was speeding up. It was getting harder and harder to keep up. My vision blurred bright, flashes streaked before my eyes. The air was thick with the sharp, metallic stench of blood. It went on forever, and then I vomited. And it let go of my hand. I heard it run, the sound fading, stretching into the distance for a minute, then another. In that tiny room, the echo of its retreat sent another wave of nausea through me. For several seconds, the only sound was the ringing silence. Then nothing. I still felt sick. The room no longer just reeked of construction dust now. The bitter stench of vomit filled the air. Over time, that smell became an anchor, marking an area of the room I refused to go near for the rest of the night. I crouched near the door, trying to gather my thoughts. I still wanted to believe that Lestat and the others were just outside, that this was all a test, that if I knocked on the door, it would all be over. That they'd laugh and call me a coward, a fool. The lingering weakness after vomiting clouded my thoughts almost as much as the fear itself. And on top of that, there was this unnatural cold. I cupped my hands, blowing warm air into them. I kept rubbing them together for warmth, until something in the darkness started breathing on them too. Cold air. Dizziness hit me again. More nausea. The night felt endless. No light ever seeped through where the window should have been. And Lestat wasn't coming. I felt like I had been trapped in that room for eternity, that any moment now, dawn would break and the door would open. But there was another thought just as strong. What if only 20 minutes had passed? And there was still plenty of time left for something else to happen. At some point, without realizing it, I started making out faint details in the darkness. Dawn was just beginning to break. Tiny cracks in the boards let in the first pale light. As the room grew brighter, time seemed to speed up, and then Lestat came for me. He wasn't alone. Nora, one of his most loyal friends, was with him. Shurawheel too, the one who drove them here. They clapped me on the back, grinning. Damn, dude. You did it. Well done. Nora and Shurawheel didn't ask me anything. We stepped outside, smoked a cigarette in silence. Then they got in the car and drove off, leaving just Lestat and me standing outside. So, how was it? He he asked. Did you spike my drink or something? Some kind of drug? What the hell was that? We didn't spike anything, kid. You know it was real, Lestat said, then added, just don't tell anyone what you saw in there, especially what they told you. They didn't tell me anything, not a damn word. Then don't say a word about what you saw either, Lestat murmured, almost apologetic. Saw? I couldn't even see my own hand in front of my face. I saw nothing, heard nothing, and sure as hell didn't understand anything. That was the end of the conversation. We got into the car. They drove me home. We said our goodbyes. The first thing I did when I got home was head straight for the shower. My parents were still asleep. It was just past 6 a.m. I stripped down, stepped into the shower, and turned on the water. It felt sacred somehow, like it was washing away what had happened. As the water ran over me, last night's events, the things I had felt, they all seemed less sharp. I still suspected that Lestat and the guys had slipped me something, that the whole thing was just a hallucination. And then I saw my left hand. 8 small, dirty smudges. A print of a tiny hand. I did not want to understand this. It didn't fit into any rational explanation. It shattered the safe, logical version of events I had almost pieced together. What was on my left hand defied logic. It was wrong, alien to this world, dirty fingerprints, 8 tiny fingers, maybe just another illusion from sleep deprivation. Soap didn't work. The sponge didn't either. Only a pumice stone managed to scrub it away. And even then, only after I scrubbed until I bled. I didn't tell Lestat about it. I just showed up the next day with a bandaged hand. The next few weeks passed as usual. We drank, wandered beyond the city, and gathered in the evenings at an abandoned kindergarten. Inside the 2-story building where the second floor had collapsed, we often spent our nights sitting atop the piles of beams and rubble. It was there that Lestat told me my second trial was coming soon. To be honest, I'd had enough after the first one, but I didn't want to lose my friends. At the time, I really thought of them as such. Lestat and I got along well. He even showed up outside my school a couple of times with F, Ing Disaster, Shaman, Asterisk, and Nora to visit the rich kids from my class. After that, no one at school bothered me anymore. Lestat had a way of drawing people and had this natural charisma. He had been an orphan since childhood, raised by his grandmother until he was 15. He didn't have a job, yet he always seemed to have money. Sometimes we would split off from the rest of the group, and he'd take me on tours of the old Nephor movement from the 90s. The forgotten subculture musicians who never made it big, poets of a single verse, drawer writers, failed artists. They were interesting people, all bound by one thing at some point. Something just didn't work out for them. Lestat never spoke about himself in a creative context. Despite being an endlessly fascinating storyteller, he somehow always steered the conversation away from himself so subtly that asking him directly felt inappropriate. But what he could, Taoists inspire, support, and of course, manipulate. He knew how to apply just the right pressure. How to twist guilt. How to make me believe that my youth made people in the group uneasy. That I needed to prove myself needed to pass the final trial. Oil, mother, Valia, and pension are against you being with us. Even Archpriest Mikhail has voiced concerns. I've never even spoken to him. The guy is always passed out drunk. I've never seen him conscious, not even once, I protested. Exactly. That's how important it is for you to prove yourself so even someone like him has no doubts. This time, the trial took place at a cemetery. There was a whole crowd of us now. Wheel was pulling shovels out of his trunk while Mother Valia frantically ran through the low cemetery fences, shrieking, "Where are you, my little hungry one?" Nora and effing Disaster took a shot of graveyard vodka and sat down at one of the stone tables on a burial plot. Oil, Greyhead, Sergei, Mitya, and Kamarina was standing near the cemetery entrance, chatting, not even coming our way. Uncle Igor saw me, called me a F-ing idiot asterisk as usual, and walked past. Meanwhile, Lestat, hungry, and one-armed Tolian went to Shura, Wheel's car, and began pulling out even stranger things from the trunk. Lestat hadn't told me what this trial would be, but when I saw them take out shovels, and then a coffin, a small one, too small for me, a sick feeling crawled through my stomach, like this had already happened before. Somewhere, long ago, so deep in the cycle of time that it was already resurfacing as a future event. Looming on the horizon, the last to arrive were Mirage and Vovanto guys in their 20s who sometimes asked me to show them a few guitar chords. They were carrying a 1-meter-long mirror wrapped in newspaper. Tonight, you'll walk a difficult path, but if you complete it, you'll be ready for the transition. Lestat's tone had changed. This wasn't his usual teasing anymore. He was serious. You'll need to bury your reflection, along with the mirror and whatever else appears in it besides you. A cold weight settled in my chest. Asterisk. Don't be afraid. As long as the mirror stays intact, nothing can harm you. But listen carefully. You must not look anywhere except the mirror. If you do, you risk seeing whoever else is reflected in it outside of the glass. It's simple. Hold it at arm's length. Watch yourself. Watch what's behind you. But do not look to the sides. Do not turn around. Do not take your eyes off the mirror. You'll become just another portrait on one of these graves. There was no smirk this time. Just cold, absolute seriousness. For real. Kid, the thing in that apartment, that was nothing. Yeah. You could actually die. Viktor Andreevich wouldn't lie. He's seen things more than you could ever imagine. Lestat nodded toward the mirror. We'll be digging the grave for that. You go with Hungry, Oil, and Uncle Igor. They'll take you to the starting point. It's not as bad as it seems. Just follow the call and watch the one who's following you. Use the mirror. Sometimes they'll lead you straight to the right grave. Other times, they'll take you on a little walk around the cemetery. But don't worry. Just remember, the moment you reach the grave and the coffin, lift the mirror above your head and don't look at it anymore. Place it inside the coffin. Our guys will be there. They'll close the lid, and that's it. Then we'll bury you. He grinned. Not you, of course. Your mirror. Your reflection. I'll explain later. Now go. Don't screw this up, kid. And with that, he left with F. Ein Disaster. and meet ya to dig the grave. I turned toward Hungry, Uncle Igor, and Oil, waiting for them to lead me to the starting position. We moved deeper into the cemetery. Along the way, pressed against a gravestone, Mother Volya sat hunched over. At first, it looked like she was just hugging the headstone, but then I looked closer. She was holding her pale breast against the lips of the dead man on the oval grave portrait. Oh, look, Mother Valya is feeding her little baby. Oil smirked. We walked past her. She kept mumbling to herself, pressing against the portrait. Hungry carried the mirror. Chatting with Oil, Uncle Igor kept insulting me, calling me a F-ing moron *** every chance he got. Soon, we reached a small hill where old wreaths, broken branches, and other cemetery debris had been dumped in a pile. Hungry handed me the mirror. Oil wished me luck. Uncle Igor cursed at me one last time. Then they left, leaving me alone. The mirror wasn't too large, about 1 meter in length, 1/2 meter in width. It barely covered my view in front, yet as I held it, I couldn't shake the feeling that it would shatter at any moment, that it was fragile. Lestat's words echoed in my head. 100 dark thoughts flooded my mind that night, but none of them, not even the fear, made me want to drop this absurd game. I didn't want to lose my only friends. So slowly, not knowing where to go, I began to move, stepping carefully, watching my own dim reflection in the moonlight, watching the dark behind me. My arms began to ache quickly. Not even 10 minutes had passed, and my shoulders were already burning. The desire to give up, to just drop it all, grew stronger. Just drop that mirror, man. Are you even in your right mind? Think about what you're doing, said a very familiar voice from ahead of me. It sounded like someone from our group, maybe distorting their voice a little, trying to mess with me. Stars? Pension? Novovin? I started guessing. Then the same voice spoke again, but this time, from behind me. What did he tell you this time? That they're going to bury your reflection. Aren't you afraid that you're the reflection? That the little coffin is actually for you? No? Never crossed your mind. A brief pause. Then the voice sounded from the front again. ***. Did you ever think that all this stuff you guys do it might not just be for show? That it might have real consequences? Did you ever wonder what the price of these rituals really is? A small stone hit me in the back. Then another. Not hard, it felt like whoever was throwing them was actually aiming at the mirror. Pebbles landed behind me, then at my feet. In the reflection, I could barely make out faint shapes. Everything blurred together, the tombstones, the trees, the silhouettes. Someone was definitely behind me. I wanted to believe it was just another one of the guys messing with me. The voice kept shifting, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. I kept moving forward, stepping carefully. The stones still fell around me, but less frequently. For a while, I was certain that it was just an elaborate, pranksome, carefully staged performance. The image in the mirror shattered that belief. I was walking forward, but instead of retreating, the reflection of what was behind me was getting closer. That broke my mind completely. I stopped. Then I started walking backward, step by step retreating, facing the mirror. Silence fell. No more voices, no more stones. Now, I was afraid. It's easy when you can just not believe. That helps a lot. But when something like this happens, when reason fails completely, you're left alone with it. That's exactly what happened to me. Nothing made sense until the flashes began. Dim, barely visible. At first, at that point, rational thought no longer mattered. Short bursts of light flickered behind me at irregular intervals. And as I continued moving backward, those flashes grew larger. They darted at strange angles, making it impossible to tell what they were. Whenever I tilted the mirror slightly, the flashes seemed to shift sometimes from one angle, sometimes another. That backward journey didn't last too long. Something was approaching. And at the same time, it was receding. The sounds behind me were growing louder. A step. Someone was getting closer. When I stopped, they stopped. By now, my thoughts had nothing to do with the guys. They had taken a darker turn. I had my guesses, and soon I realized I wasn't far from the truth. Someone was behind me, and as they got closer, everything clicked into place. They were holding a mirror too, at arm's length, walking backward just like me, mirroring my every move. A perfect reflection. We collided. In the upper corner of my mirror, I saw the edge of theirs. The whole thing felt surreal. The moonlight was barely enough to see anything. Certainly not enough to make out who was behind me. This didn't feel like one of Lestat's pranks. They only moved when I moved. They never acted on their own. Only copied. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make out their face. Just the faintest glimpse of their head. There was no overt horror. And somehow, that made it worse. Fear needed something tangible. A form, a face. But in this eerie, unnatural moment, mine found nothing. So it started creating one. At first, my own reflection looked slightly distorted in the dim light. Then, the details sharpened. Branches, thorns. They seemed to grow from my head. The face in the mirror warped, twisting into something harsher, more grotesque. And as it changed, the figure behind me pressed in harder. They were no longer just mirroring me. They were controlling me, pushing me, guiding me, shifting to the side, maneuvering around me. And in a brief instant, we switched places. Now, they were standing where I had been just moments ago, and without hesitation, they began walking away. I did too, this time as I moved forward. The reflection grew smaller, fading into the distance. Not long after, I started to hear voices. Lestat, the others. They were waiting for me. When I reached them, I remembered Lestat's instructions. I lifted the mirror above my head, closed my eyes, and placed it inside the small coffin. As I stepped away from it all, did the burning pain in my shoulders finally crash down on me? You did it. Well done. To be honest, no one really believed you would. Soon, everything will make sense to you, and what seems like complete nonsense now will start to have meaning. You've probably asked yourself more than once, what's the point of all this? I think it's time I tell you about Viktor Andreevich first before we talk about the transition. Have you heard the urban legend about the fours? Asterisk? Asterisk? Yeah, the whole elevator 666 thing. Mirage told me about it not long ago. And do you know why it's called fours? Well, because all the apartment numbers had fours in the month 4, 2 4s, and so on, I said. Nope, way off. You've probably heard that if you press the number 6 in the elevator 6 times, you'll enter a dimension with no exit, where everything is marked with the number 4, right? That part is just a myth, but its roots, the real story, come from something much darker. Viktor Andreevich told me what really happened in that building, why it has such a cursed reputation in our city. Have you ever heard of mine collapses? Especially the ones caused by methane explosions. Back in '91, we had one of the worst mining disasters in the city's history. Over 100 people died. The government scrambled to save face, trying to show compassion. A new era was beginning. They needed the political points. So the mayor at the time made a bold promise. Every affected family would receive new housing within 2 weeks. He pulled together 12 regional construction teams and forced them to throw up a 5-story building nothing but bare walls at first. He brought in people who had no real experience with residential construction. Day and night, they hacked together a building with such bizarre, nonsensical design choices that, over time, the sheer level of incompetence somehow became a kind of twisted genius. They built with whatever materials they could scavenge from across the region, anything they could get their hands on. Instead of an elevator, they installed a mineshaft lift. They put apartment doors inside rooms, inside bathrooms and toilets. Windowsills were facing inward. In one part of the building, the staircase from the 4th to the 5th floor was installed upside down. It was as if morons had built it, a Frankenstein house. A complete disaster, but they finished it in 2 weeks. And they gave the keys to over 100 grieving families. Now imagine living in a place like that, especially after such overwhelming loss. Not even a day passed before the top floors started flooding with sewage. Some idiot had misinstalled the entire plumbing system. But what could they do? This was the era of perestroika. Everything was a mess. No money, no jobs, just survival. So they stayed trapped in that monstrosity. Okay. But what does this have to do with us? I interrupted. Lestat smirked. Asterisk, asterisk. That building the 4 from all the urban legends. For years, it absorbed human suffering like a sponge. And the city kept using it repeatedly, housing people there who had lost loved ones in various disasters. They started sending people there to die. And some didn't even need to be sent. Some were drawn to it. They rented apartments on their own, and then vanished. That building, it twisted reality. It burned a hole through our world, the way a cigarette burns through a bedsheet. Some people disappear inside it. Others find a way to use it to their advantage. Viktor Andreevich was one of those people. You see, he found me, came from another world, taught me how to move between them. He changed my life, helped me become who I am. Before I met him, I weighed 49 kilograms and was deep in the system. Nora and I were wasting away in my grandmother's apartment, strung out on anything we could get our hands on. Nora was dying in the living room, and 2 was about to hang myself in the bedroom. Thina miracle, a knock at the door. A man standing there, so kind, calling me son. I wasn't or fan ever knew my parents. My grandmother refused to even speak about them. At first, I thought he was just another cultist. Son, all that crap. But I gave up. Took it as a sign. And then life started changing, fast. I got clean. So did Nora. Viktor Andreevich started visiting us every day, bringing food, alcohol, We drank together, talked. For a while, I just saw him as some insanely hardcore old mana guy who could down half a liter of vodka in one go and then immediately drop and do over 100 push-ups. Then we started realizing he wasn't just some old man. One day, he'd be talking about the nature of reality. The next how time bends under interference. We barely understood him. But the more we listened, the more the world changed. Then came his rituals. I asked the same thing you're asking now. Why? What's the point? And he told me, be patient. Then, there was this. The Stott gestured around us, the cemetery. Viktor Andreevich told us he came from another world, and that you could reach it if you followed the right sequence of actions. If you manipulated the metaphysical laws of the universe. He said a lot more, but I've only got one head to hold all this knowledge, you know? He called it the transition. Everything was perfect. Frank. Our group grew. Viktor Andreevich changed. Suddenly, he looked sick. He started asking where our health correction centers were. We laughed at him. He was searching for recovery stations, he said, in his world. They were on every street corner. Free healthcare. Then, for the first time, he started talking about things he had never spoken of before. Nora and Pension kept pressing him, eager to hear more about his world. Within days, he could barely move, and the things he told us, they were almost impossible to believe. In his world, there is no religion. Christianity never existed because science was never persecuted. The technological revolution happened in the 11th century. Humanity reached the moon in 1490. There hasn't been a war for over 200 years. No governments, no money. Everything is ruled by intelligence calculating probabilities, maintaining balance. He found an anomaly in his world, something wrong. And that's what led him here. And then he told us how he got here. And he asked us for a final favor. He wanted us to take him to the fore. Said he needed to go back, to be healed, and that he would return for us. We didn't believe him, even as we loaded him into the elevator, closed the metal gate. He told me everything. I still hoped he was just some crazy old drunk. Then the elevator went down. It was gone for 10 minutes, and when it came back, it was empty. He came back later, right? I asked. That's the thing, Lestat said. We thought he'd get treated and return, but it's been over 7 years now, and he never came back. And you seriously believe all that stuff he said? About landing on the moon in the 15th century, a world without wars? More than believe, Lestat said. I know it's possible to get there. The whole day had already been a mind-bending nightmare. But Lestat's last words sounded outright insignificant in the middle of all the madness happening around me. So what now? Another impossible ritual? I don't even want to imagine, I started. But Lestat cut me off. That's the thing, there's nothing else to do. You've already completed the correct sequence. A regular person could do the same rituals and nothing would happen. But in your case, the outcome will be different. All you need to do is step into the elevator. Press the number 4 3 times. On the 4th press, hold it down and wait. The elevator will move. At some point, the emergency phone will ring. Asterisk, asterisk. He glanced at me, gauging my reaction. I've told you before, But I'll say it again, this isn't a regular elevator. It's a makeshift mine shaft lift, patched together with random parts. The button panel, it's from a completely different building, a 9-story complex. And since the lift was originally meant for a mine, it has an emergency phone. It will ring, and that's it. What's it? What do you mean that's it? You pick up the phone, and that's it. Uh-huh. Sure. That easy, huh? Why wouldn't it be? Lestat smirked. Asterisk, asterisk. The road to a better world only seems deceptive at first. The closer you get to the transition, the simpler it becomes. And there's no catch, no ghosts, no horror show? Nope. And what about you guys? What about us? We're right behind you. No hard feelings. Kid children, women, and the elderly first. I'm going last. Gotta make sure everything runs smoothly. That sick feeling crawled back into my gut. That fear of disappointing the group. Of looking like a coward. All right, I said. And we walked toward Shura, Wheel's car. For the entire following week, it felt like the whole world was pushing me toward the transition. Even though the whole thing felt ridiculous to me, something kept nudging me forward. My parents fought constantly. My dad left for several days. The rich kids at school started messing with me again this time, warning me that if I brought my older friends back, they'd file a police report. Everything felt like it was closing in, like my only option was to want the transition. I kept imagining that better world in 1,000 different ways. And the closer the chosen date came, the more I wanted to go there. The night before it was supposed to happen, I couldn't sleep. I had expected everything to be ritualistic, dramatic, full of long pauses, ominous speeches, a sense of dark mystery. Instead, everything felt rushed. Lestat was acting strange, kept glancing over his shoulder, kept messing up people's names. He ran back and forth, barely keeping track of anything. Looking back now, anyone else in my position would have understood right then and there that something was wrong. But two didn't want to see it. Maybe another version of Mion that never would have ended up in this situation would have figured it out sooner. Too many things pointed towards something horribly wrong. Even Uncle Igor, when he called me a F-ing idiot asterisk for the last time, had said something else. Something I can't quite remember. Something like, "You know what's happening, there's no coming back." He lunged at me, grabbed me by the collar. ING disaster. And Nora pulled him away, dragged him off somewhere. Lestat kept pacing around the building. He wouldn't go inside. At the entrance, Kamarina and Hungry stood watch. They kept taking turns going in, then running back to Lestat, whispering something to him. Every time, Lestat would disappear into the shadows of the courtyard, then come back and call them over again. Their behavior was bizarre. The whole frantic atmosphere started infecting me, making me nervous. Despite all the legends, the 4 building didn't look terrifying. Just a regular 5-story apartment complex falling apart. Barely lit. A few windows still had lights on. Their restless pacing went on for half an hour. Then Lestat rushed toward me. It's time. We stepped inside. And the moment I crossed the threshold, I understood why the city's stories about this place were so horrifying. It was the atmosphere. From the yellow, murky light to the stale, suffocating air, it all reeked of suffering, Thick, slow, lifeless despair. I wanted to turn back, to run. But Lestat kept moving forward. Hurry up. We don't have much time. Get in the cage. He pulled open the metal elevator gates. Why the rush? Is everything okay? I asked. Yeah, it's fine. Get in. He wouldn't even look at me. And still I stepped inside, even though every part of me was screaming not, Leoha? I said, calling him by his real name. Luceno offense, but I don't like this. Something feels wrong. By then, he had already closed the gates. He stood outside, facing away. Just do it right. 3 presses of 4. Hold it on the 4th, then wait for the call. And what's the call about? What will they even ask me? Kid, we're out of time. Just press the buttons. I started pressing, still asking my question. Pressed 3 times, held it down on the 4th. The elevator lurched. What will they ask me, Lioha? What question? I'm sorry, Lestat shouted. What? Did he say crutch? Did he say hello? I'm sorry, why? The elevator jerked upward for a moment, then began to descend, slowly, downward, to a depth that should not exist. I saw Lestat standing in the entryway, and for the last time, he couldn't bring himself to look at me. Sorry? The realization slammed into me. The lift was going down, not up. I let go of the button, but it was too late. The elevator kept sinking, slowly, descending into something that should not be there. I frantically pressed all the buttons, over and over, probably 100 times. But nothing changed. The number 4 remained dead. A minute passed, then another. The yellow light bulb flickered weakly, barely enough to see anything outside the metal bars. There was movement. Something was shifting beyond the shaft. I was falling into nowhere. My phone unresponsive. Black screen. I was completely alone. It had gone too far. The bulb dimmed, flickered again, and then the emergency phone rang. I lifted the receiver, but I didn't speak, didn't dare. A dial tone. A woman's voice, tense with fear, broke the silence. Hello, is this VPC -2? A wave of cold fear rushed through my body. The voice echoed, stretching unnaturally. How did I know that phrase? And then, as if triggered by the woman's words, dozens of other voices erupted all at once. It was like listening to a chorus of distress, calls people dialing ambulances, police, fire services, begging for help. Hundreds of voices, some crying, some screaming, some pleading. The longer it went on, the more their voices merged into a single deafening noise. The noise peaked. Silence. A cold, emotionless voice spoke into the receiver. State the number. I was too terrified to answer. State the number. I forced myself to respond hesitant, unsure. 4. A brief pause. That number does not exist. A flat dial tone followed. Whoever it was, they had hung up. At the same moment, the light inside the elevator flickered back on. A second later, concrete walls began flashing past the elevator doors again, still descending. The lift finally reached the first floor. I was back right where I had started. The same dirty hallway, the same murky yellow light. Believe me, if I were to describe every shade of fear I had felt that night. Every emotion, this story would never end. All I wanted was to see my friends. I ran outside, but there was no one there. Just the quiet, cold, and indifferent night. That time in my life, it was the formative years of my youth. I was 15. Everything I went through shaped me, and yet it was impossible to accept that, in a single night, all my friends had disappeared. Gone. Every single one. Their phone numbers were invalid. I had no other way to find them. All the places we used to hang out empty. Outside of them, I had no other friends. No mutual acquaintances. Nothing. The only proof I had was one blurry, low-quality photo. Too dark to make out much. That was it. And for years, I convinced myself that I had made it all up. A delusion born from loneliness. For a long time, that was my official version of what had happened. Life returned to normal. Back to music school. Back to playing Time Zero until morning. Back to school and my parents' constant fights. Life went on point 2007 ended. Then 2008, 2009, 2010. Music school ended. So did high school. So did my parents' marriage. They went their separate ways each to their own new families. And I moved to Odessa for university. That's where I stayed. Time rushed forward. Until 2020. Until the pandemic. By then, I barely saw my parents. Once every few years and holidays. Maybe. Then, in October, my father got COVID and was hospitalized. He had been living alone for years. I had to return to my hometown to take care of him. After the divorce, he never had more kids. So, my old room, the one where I had spent my entire youth, had been left untouched. The same posters on the walls, the same PlayStation 2, and my old computer, still sitting there, unmoved since I had left. By that time, I had become deeply sentimental, a nostalgic person. I preferred rewatching movies I'd already seen. Replaying old games instead of trying new ones. I turned on the computer, and my heart froze when I saw the Time Zero desktop shortcut. By then, the game had already been shut down after 16 years of existence. It had officially closed just a few months prior, in August. I had barely missed it. Disappointed. I opened the game's root folder, started looking for the chat logs and private message archives. I wanted to dive into nostalgia, to read through my old, late-night conversations with my guildmates, to relive that time. The game's chat archives worked in a specific way. Every character you had ever spoken to had their own folder, time-stamped and dated. The same applied to private messages. I want to emphasize something. My old computer had been sitting in my father's house, untouched, since I moved out. Unplugged, stored away, since 2010. Once I left for university, I had switched to a laptop. That old PC had been gathering dust for over a decade. No one had used it. So when I found a folder in the chat logs named Lestat, dated the 31st of July, 2022, I nearly fell out of my chair. There was only one message inside. A long, private message. And here, I will show it to you. Hey kid, if you're reading this, it means you're alive. Sorry for the bluntness, but it's easier for me to think of you as dead. Easier to believe you never made it as far as I fear you did. Do you remember how many times you pressed the 4 in the elevator? I have a suspicion you may have overdone it. But whatever. You've probably spent years wondering what happened that night, where everyone disappeared to, why nothing seemed to change. Now, I guess you deserve the truth I knew. Nothing personal. That's just how this world works. Do you remember Viktor Andreevich, the one who called himself my father? The one who told stories about a world without war, where people landed on the moon centuries ago, where medicine was free. He wasn't lying. He really came from there, from that world, descending from the peak until he ended up here, in our reality, dirty, broken, hopeless. And you wouldn't believe why he was looking for me, his son. He said I was the variable that made the equation fundamentally wrong, because the answer led to infinity, a quantum error. He was a smart old man, said a lot of things, especially things I had to keep to myself. He told me about the endless vertical. At the top, there's a world without religion, without money, without war. Further down, the realm of slow energy, where matter triumphs. A place where suffering, pain, fear, and misery accumulate. A depth where the external pressure is so immense that those who dwell there transform. They become grotesque. Like deep-sea fish, the descent is infinite. You've noticed it, haven't you? That nothing really changed after your transition. The world stayed the same. I just got here recently. Where I came from, there was no COVID pandemic. But in your world, there is. That's just one difference. There are thousands more small and large. More than you can imagine. You're probably wondering, why did I keep transitioning if I already knew all this? It's funny, isn't it? You think you have infinite possibilities, but in reality, it all comes down to one function. Don't make things worse for yourself. It's simple. If you start moving down, your polarity shifts. Reality tries to push you out, to self-correct. And once you enter another world, you become an error that needs to be erased. We grow up believing that the cure for a bad illness is a good pill. But reality doesn't work like that. Against something bad, it throws something even worse. It responds to monstrosity with greater monstrosity, and so on. Forever. Viktor Andreevich realized this immediately, and he explained the principle to me. Either you feed the abyss, or it eats you. I'm sorry, kid, but I had to feed you to it. All the potential of your future, your possible future. I know this sounds like insane rambling, and I envy those who will never have to understand it. But when you let the abyss swallow someone innocent, reality momentarily forgets its need to correct itself. Remember our huge group? I had to feed them all to it. At first, it was smooth, but then they started coming for me more often, and I had to keep pushing people into the elevator. No more Viktor Andreevich's rituals, just getting them drunk, drugging them, sending them through with no return ticket. You can guess it didn't end well. Soon, it didn't matter if someone went willingly or not. They were taken all the same. Maybe there were just too many of us. Or maybe I ed up. Either way, I'm really sorry. Remember Uncle Igor, the one who kept calling you a dumbass? He was trying to warn you. He tried more than once. They caught up to him in this world. He got tired of running. He hanged himself. A year before that, Camarina killed herself too. Gas poisoning, Sherwheel, oil, and in disaster. Crashed into a wall going 200 kilometers per h hungry. Gray-haired Sergei, Mother Valia, Mirage. They're still running, still descending into worse and worse realities. Until they get caught, they'll break too, sooner or later. Kid, try to be strong. I know what you're about to ask. Who's chasing you? And why you need to run. I don't want to scare you, but even now, if you start paying attention, you'll notice them. At first, it won't be obvious. Just odd behavior, illogical actions, like your neighbors, taking empty buckets to the dumpster, scooping up trash, and bringing it back home. Something close to that. That's just the shallow water. They'll start pressing in, chipping away at you, making life unbearable. You'll start noticing them following you. Crowds of random strangers. In grocery stores. They'll try to steal items from your cart. Doing things that make no sense. That's the warning. That's when you leave. Before it's too late, it's a shitty choice. If you stay, life turns to hell. If you leave, hell is the only place left to go. Like they say, there's no destination, only the path. Looks like we all have to become a little samurai. Viktor Andreevich always said there was a third option, that you could dim your mind, become invisible to this world. He believed that if you ignored it completely, reality would accept you as part of its background, forget about you. But that never worked for me. So here's my advice. For old time's sake, don't wait. There's no miracle. Make the transition as soon as you can. You'll get some peace. But the world will be worse. You'll have a month, maybe a year. Then they will find you again. And when they do, keep moving. The rules haven't changed. 3 short presses. 1 long. The same cursed 4. You know, all this time, one question haunted me. Why did they kill themselves? Why end it when you can just keep moving? Rest for a while, and when it gets bad again, transition further. You could live forever, and yet, they still chose to die. Now, I think I understand. And soon so will you. And just like that, a message out of nowhere. The only real proof that Lestat ever existed. Over the years, I've forgotten what he even looked like. I remember he resembled the actor from Queen of the Damned. But I don't remember the person. My father spent over a month in the hospital. Eventually, he was discharged. I went back to Odessa. About 6 months later, I finally understood what Lestat meant. Maybe some of you have heard of Starokin Market in Odessa. On weekends, it turns into an endless labyrinth of flea market stalls. You can find the most insane junk there. They sell everything. And that's when I saw them. Prosthetics. 2 prosthetic right arms. Next to Thema worn-out plastic leg. They were neatly arranged on a red cloth. Beside them, 2 perfect rows of dental bridges and crowns. Teeth. Real human teeth. After that day, I started seeing people with prosthetics everywhere. Every single day. And okay, maybe that alone wasn't weird. But then, on a tram, one of them touched my hand on the railing with their prosthetic, and it was warm, like it was alive. Then I started realizing this wasn't just coincidence. Something around me was wrong. Ads for prosthetics everywhere. Prosthetic arms, prosthetic legs, prosthetic heads, prosthetic children, then amputation ads, family amputations for the holidays, prosthetics for bread, internet amputation, prosthetics for street garbage, amputation of homes, amputation of the sky, limited time offer before New Year's amputation and prosthetics. It was driving me insane. That's when I realized I had to transition again. I went back to my city, calmly walked into the elevator, repeated the sequence, descended. I wasn't even scared anymore. Maybe I had just lost my mind a long time ago. I just wanted some peace. For a few months, things were quiet. Then it started again. This time, no amputations. Now they started misspeaking. A doctor prescribing something for my knee pain. Told me to eat squats. He even wrote it on the prescription. I asked him 5 times what he meant. He looked at me like I was an idiot. Eat squats and you'll be fine. Squats for joint pain. Squats for gout. Squats for inflammation. Squats to maintain squats. On TV, they advertise squat-based medicine, ointments, pills, in the commercials. An elderly woman was rubbing squats on her squats. I don't know what the others in our old group saw before they killed themselves. I don't know what Lestat truly meant. This stuff doesn't scare me anymore. It just slowly drives you insane. Lestat once mentioned a third path. That's my last hope. For the past 6 months, I've been meditating. Slowly, I've been learning to control my mind, to ignore all the madness, to dismiss the wrongness of this world. And it seems like they're backing off, like they're giving up. I want to believe that salvation is possible. Before I go, I have 2 pieces of news for you. Bad news. If you're reading this, you're not in the best version of reality. If you're reading this, we're in the same slice. Good news. There are far worse realities. And chances are you won't end up in them. Yesterday, I made my last transition, just in case. Starting over. New life. I believe everything will be okay. I believe in the third path. Today is the 22nd of February 2022. So everything seems fine. Feels normal here. Like all the horror is far behind me. Thank you. To everyone who read my story to the end, I think in a couple of days, I'll finally go outside, take a walk. I hope nothing bad happens anymore.